Welcome to Virginia Time Travel, your portal to the Commonwealth's past, present, and future. Presidential elections can be classified as three different things: A, dramatic; B, anticlimactic; and C, controversial. For a dramatic election, we can certainly look at that of Barack Obama becoming the first African-American president. For anticlimactic, we look at the previous election before then, when everyone expected controversy and nothing happened. As for controversial, well, today, that is the topic of our show. We're going to look at some of the most controversial presidential elections that have occurred in our nation's history, examining what was it all about, why was it so controversial, and why is it we still talk about it today. Joining me is our co-host, Charles Mills, and you went ahead and pulled out a few that you felt were particularly of interest.
Well, I did. I mean, when people talk about disputed elections, they start thinking about Bush v. Gore. This has nothing to do with Bush v. Gore. Disputed elections have been going on in this country almost since the beginning. 1800 was a disputed election.
Well, yeah, 1800 was a very disputed election. I mean, let's go ahead and set the scene. Who's president going into 1800?
We've got John Adams.
Okay. Who's vice president?
And he's up against his archenemy, Thomas Jefferson.
Right. Now, remember, John Adams is the president, Thomas Jefferson is the vice president, but the rules of the election are different compared to how we think of today, because in 1800 they're following the original plan of the Electoral College, which is the electors meet, they write down who they want for president and who the vice president ought to be. So it's basically the top two picks. Whoever gets the most votes becomes president, and whoever's runner-up becomes vice president. And so it's a little bit more of a convoluted system, but the feeling was that you would have enough people intertwined that it should be fair and balanced. Now, the 1800 election proves to be even more interesting because Thomas Jefferson does something that kind of broke the rules just a little bit. He will go ahead and talk to the governor of New York. So you have a southerner running for president, and now you've got a northerner who he says, run with me, I'll become president, you'll be vice president. Because I'll get all my people to back you, you get all your people to back me. Burr goes for it. He says, sure. John Adams finds out about this, and he'll get Thomas Pinckney of South Carolina to go ahead and be his running mate. And so the 1800 election becomes the first election where we have party tickets. And you really kind of needed it this time, because that was the whole thing, is that you had a president from one part of the country, you needed the vice president to be from the other part. But up to this point, not so much a controversial election, right? We're not too controversial.
No, that's pretty bland.
Then the vote happens. Thomas Jefferson, 74. Aaron Burr, 74. John Adams, 53. What do you notice?
Well, you've got Burr and Jefferson in a tie.
Exactly. John Adams already said if he were going to go ahead and come in second to Jefferson, there is no way he's going back to the VP. And being in third place, he's pretty much done, is dead in the water. Reason being is that Adams has enough enemies in Congress that they're not going to let him have a second term at this point, especially since the election is now disputed. So, according to constitutional law, any presidential election that does not end where a candidate has the majority of electoral votes will automatically be thrown to the House of Representatives. Now, do you know how it works in the House of Representatives?
No.
Okay. How it works in the House of Representatives is every state has one vote. Okay?
Okay.
One vote. Now, by today's terms, we have 50 states. Of those 50, how many do you need to vote for you in order to become president?
I guess 2/3?
26.
26.
You need just one, a simple majority. You got this thing locked in. Okay? And it continues to go forward and forward until finally it comes through. 36 ballots later, Thomas Jefferson is declared President of the United States. Aaron Burr is VP. Now, what's unique about the number of ballots I just told you?
I don't know.
36. This should have been a slam dunk, one and out, right?
Well, you would think since Burr was going to be Jefferson's vice president, that they would have.
You'd think so, but here's the thing. Here's Aaron Burr. He's the governor of New York. He was told he's going to be the number 2 guy. He ties in a presidential election, his first shot out. If you're Aaron Burr, I'm one vote away. Are you kidding?
So he's doing a little backroom politicking?
You got that right. He's not going to play second fiddle to a guy he can beat. He figures this is the perfect opportunity. I can go ahead and become president of the United States. Washington, Adams, Burr. He beats out the guy who wrote the Declaration of Independence.
Well, this is definitely a disputed election.
It's a disputed election, and it kind of also creates a little bit of a tension between Jefferson and Burr that
you'd
really,
think.
it manifests itself very quickly. Because keep in mind, here's Jefferson. He figured Burr was going to go ahead and just be the good little toady and do what he was told. No, he's an opportunist. Burr realizes the opportunity. 1803, Aaron Burr shoots Alexander Hamilton. He's bumped off the ticket. He's not going to get a second term. A couple more years later, in 1806, Thomas Jefferson is getting Aaron Burr tried for treason and is telling John Marshall, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, by the way, he's guilty. You're saying he's guilty. Talk about holding a grudge.
Yeah. Talk about politics never changing.
Oh, yeah, and it's a side of Jefferson you don't really think about.
No, you don't.
I mean, this is a vindictive man who is very much bent on destroying Aaron Burr.
So now we jump forward a couple of decades and we get into the 1824 election, which is also a dirty election, and there's something running around being called the corrupt bargain.
Yeah.
So what is this corrupt bargain?
1824, there's a cast member with a familiar name in this election. Who do you think that cast member is?
Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Jackson. He is a former governor of Tennessee. He is undeniably one of the most popular people in the country. Old Hickory, the hero of Battle of New Orleans, he took advantage of this in 1814, used it to step up into a political career. Everyone in Tennessee knew that this man had higher ambitions. And he's a military hero, successful governor. He's coming from the West. He's definitely the guy who has the opportunity to go ahead and go to the presidency. But there's another character in this particular story, John Quincy Adams, son of the former president. Now, Quincy Adams is seen as almost the heir apparent. Secretary of State. In the previous runs, the last three presidents before this election, all former Secretary of States. James Monroe was Secretary of State to James Madison. Madison was Secretary of State to Thomas Jefferson, and Jefferson was Secretary of State to George Washington. You notice that Secretary of State seems to be a stepping stone to the presidency, because you do have quite a bit of authority there. Well, what happens is that Adams is going to run, but he's not alone. You have a third guy in this whole thing, former Speaker of the House, Henry Clay. Now, Henry Clay has ambitions of becoming president. He doesn't much care for Andrew Jackson, and ironically enough, he doesn't like John Quincy Adams, but he tolerates him enough, so it's okay. And then there's a fourth guy, William Crawford of Georgia. Now, William Crawford is interesting because he suffered a stroke the year before and still made a run for the presidency.
So are there four political parties?
Well, no, that's the irony. There's one political party. It's the Democrats. It's our modern day Democrats. At this time, they're called Democratic Republicans. Now, I want to go ahead and stress a very important thing here. When I say Democratic Republicans, we're not talking about the Democrats and the Republicans we think of today. Democratic Republican meant that you believed in the principles of a republic, like Rome, but in a democratic fashion. Because the word democracy, even in the early 19th century, is seen as a very taboo word. The whole prospect of being a democracy, nobody wanted it. That's why when we say the Pledge of Allegiance today, we don't say, and to the democracy for which you stand. No, we say to the republic. But in today's standards, republic...
Which means that they didn't have universal suffrage. Not everybody could vote in that.
Exactly. We didn't have universal suffrage. And in 1824, only those who were upper class or had a certain amount of property were permitted to go ahead and vote. Everyone else, not allowed.
So there's a one-party system. Whoever gets the nomination becomes the president.
Well, basically, I mean, you have everyone from the same party. It's all understood. So whichever's the guy theoretically is most popular is going to get it. Well, in this case, because you have so many candidates running, you create an issue, and that is the favorite son. Because for Henry Clay, he's an astute politician. He understands this. Favorite son in politics has its advantages, because what happens now is being a favorite son means you can divide the country up regionally. And this is how you can guarantee a throw to the House of Representatives. And for Henry Clay, he was Speaker. He knows all the boys. He could easily sway the election his way. Well, it doesn't quite work out that way. You see,
So basically, even though they're all members of the same party, they can all run for president without a nomination.
without the nomination process.
So the parties weren't so much,
The party,
they aren't as important as they are today.
well, and therein is the thing. You said parties. It's party.
Right.
Doesn't matter
Right.
because they're all on the same team.
So basically, they're coming out of their state, they get themselves on the ballot, and they're just kind of running as interest blocks.
Exactly. And the thing is that if you can, and that's where your VP really comes into play a lot of times, because your vice president could really make a huge difference here. Now, ironically enough, the guy who comes out of this pretty well in 1824 is a guy by the name of John C. Calhoun from South Carolina. John C. Calhoun wanted to run for president as well, but saw that the field had three very big heavyweights and kind of a middleweight in Crawford, but no one was running for VP. So what does Calhoun do? I'll be vice president. He had that thing in the bag. It was done. He was secured. So you have the election. Andrew Jackson gets the most electoral votes. John Quincy Adams comes in second. Third place is William Crawford. Fourth place is Henry Clay. But since Jackson did not have the supermajority, so to speak, now the election must go to the House of Representatives. But in the House of Representatives, it's the top three that go.
Okay.
Who's in fourth place? Henry Clay.
Henry Clay.
Henry Clay's out. He can't do anything. So what happens? You got Jackson, you got Adams, you got Crawford. Now Crawford is kind of seen as this compromise candidate that you could theoretically rally behind, saying, well, let the two guys who are really full of steam go ahead and do it. Problem is Crawford's kind of old. Everyone knows that stroke has debilitated him. There's no real way he could make a very good president at all. So it's time to go ahead and start looking at this as really a two-way race here. It's Jackson versus Adams, Adams versus Jackson. Who's going to win? Well, lo and behold, there's a guy in the House of Representatives that's going to go ahead and make a little bit of noise. And that guy has a familiar name, Henry Clay.
Aha.
Henry Clay talks to his people and says, we're throwing all of our support behind Andrew Jackson. If you look at the Electoral College, you look at the way the states voted, realistically speaking,
That's not how it turned out, right?
it's not how it turned out because Jackson had the majority. But in the House of Representatives, he had the minority because, lo and behold, you had Maryland switch teams.
So this is where the so-called corrupt bargain comes
Yes. Because what happens is Maryland switches teams because Maryland went for Jackson. And if you...
in. So a little payoff here in Maryland?
well, not necessarily. You see, what happened was that Jackson versus Adams supporters shifted in Congress. So all of a sudden now you had more Adams supporters in Congress compared to Jackson. And that was where one of these things that you kind of noticed. There was a bit of a change here. But the corrupt bargain. What happened was a newspaper out in Philadelphia went ahead and published a report from an outgoing member of Congress who had complained that there was a corrupt bargain going on between the Adams administration and Henry Clay. And basically what happened was that Henry Clay was given the coveted position of Secretary of State.
And in return for that, he threw his support to.
Well, everything seemed to scream that.
So why is that a corrupt bargain?
Well, the thing is
That's kind of done all the time, isn't it?
well, it's done all the time, but here's the thing. Henry Clay being named Secretary of State means based off of precedence.
Ah.
You've had 4 out of 6 presidents, we're up to 6 presidents now. 4 out of the 6 have held what position?
Secretary of State.
Which means if Henry Clay becomes Secretary of State, Henry Clay has been named the heir apparent. Now for John C. Calhoun, wait a minute, I want to be president. Now I'm going to be done with the VP slot and this guy's going to get it? You got to be kidding me. So Andrew Jackson sees this for what it is. How dare this guy go ahead and do this? John Quincy Adams was now in a relatively tough position because here's the thing. He knows his election was not what one would call a very fair, won-out election. Instead, what you have here is he needed to show a lot more humility.
Now, this sounds like a lot of backroom, cigar smoke-filled rooms,
Yeah.
and a lot of deal cutting. And
It is, in a lot of ways, a lot of deal cutting. But here's the thing. Adams took it like, see, I won. Told you I was going to win. He arrogantly flaunted the victory.
But he was a one-term president.
He was a one-term president because 4 years later, Andrew Jackson comes in there. He spent the last 4 years running for president. And you know you're not that good when the current sitting VP decides to join your opponent. So John C. Calhoun will go from the 6th president to the 7th president as vice president.
All right, well, that is definitely convoluted, makes our politics look like simplicity itself.
Well, it
Makes look
does.
like you're running for class president. Now, 1860, I guess you'd almost have to say that's the most controversial election because it ended in a civil war.
Well, controversial in the fact that you knew it was going to end in a civil war. Okay, everyone knew that's where it was going. I mean,
Well, you'd think they would have pulled back, wouldn't you?
well, you'd think, but I mean, it basically.
So who's running?
All right, here's what you got. The Republicans in 1856 had run John C. Fremont, and when Fremont ran, he came within 2 states of becoming the first Republican president of the United States. Now, I point this out.
And they were a very new party.
They were. They'd only been around since 1854, so they're 6 years old. They've had 1 presidential election, and they came within a hair's breadth of winning.
Right.
Now, it's important to set this up because when the Republicans ran, they won all of New England. They won basically what we would see as the North today. They didn't quite win the old Northwest 100%.
So they're like a regional party.
They basically had regional power, but the Republican leadership realized that the electoral power of the North, combined with the old Northwest Territory, is enough to win the presidency.
Now, what's the old Northwest Territory?
Now, the old Northwest Territory would be present-day Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, all that area. So that's what you need. If you can secure that plus the North, you've basically got this thing in the bag.
Kind of sounds like our blue states today.
Exactly. I mean, it would be this pretty much the modern blue state territory. But here's the thing. So the Republicans have to consider who they want. For the top slot, they're in a huge deadlock. They can't decide. But an interesting guy pops up as a possible VP candidate, and that is Abraham Lincoln. Everyone likes him. So they decide, well, what if we just elevate him to the top dog position? And so they do, and everyone can rally behind Lincoln. For the Democrats, they do not have this situation going on. They're actually split between Southern and Northern Democrats. Northern Democrats will rally around Stephen Douglas. And Stephen Douglas doesn't exactly make a very impressive looking president. He's short, he's fat, he's kind of balding. He's not.
But he's a really good speaker.
Oh, yeah, he's a good
I
speaker.
mean, he beat Lincoln for the Senate.
Well, he did beat Lincoln for the Senate, but the thing is, he's a Northerner, and Southerners aren't going to be liking that. Their guy is Breckinridge, current sitting VP of the United States. So the Democrats are split. The Republicans are unified. Republicans go ahead and run, and they get the election flat out because they took the North.
Did Douglas win any states?
Douglas had won a couple states. Breckinridge won a few. But realistically speaking, the South was divided. The North was unified. And that's what the election, I mean, the controversy that breaks down, of course, is the Civil War will occur.
Right.
But it's one of those elections, everyone knew it was coming. I mean, this is one of those things. If Breckinridge had won or if Douglas had won, South probably would have been placated for another election cycle. But
So
Civil
you
War
would have
was
thought
on
that the
horizon.
Democrats would have come up with a candidate that.
The problem is that
Could
the
have won.
Southerners were seeing themselves too much as an independent nation already. And so this is one of those things that makes it difficult, which makes the next controversial election of 76 that much more important because the
So
Republicans.
now we've had the Civil War.
Exactly.
The South is occupied still with Union troops,
Right.
so-called Reconstruction.
Right. And as a result, what happens is now Southern Democrats, they kind of got their game put together again. They try to back disheartened Republicans to get their way. Doesn't work. They run Democrats. Doesn't work. What they decide to do is wait it out and see when they find the right election. And then it comes. Of all the people in the world, it's a northerner they're banking their money on, Samuel Tilden. He's the governor of New York. He's going to be running against the governor of Ohio, Rutherford B. Hayes. And realistically speaking, either man would make a great president. It's the election that defines it. What happens is that the South is putting in their votes, and there's controversial outcomes. You're going to have 4 states with controversial issues: South Carolina, Florida, Louisiana.
Now, when you say controversial issues, what you mean is election fraud.
Well, election fraud in a lot of different ways, and Oregon's the final one. You see, what happened is that Dan Sickles is supposedly famous for being one that says this thing isn't over yet, because Tilden, in the middle of the night, was up to 184 votes. He is 1 vote away.
1 electoral vote away.
Yeah, 1 electoral vote away from winning the whole thing. Then a lot of these other states coming in, and Hayes is picking up steam and momentum, and it's coming along. All of a sudden, Hayes is up to 185, 184. Hayes wins. But again, election fraud. You have 4 states in debate. 3 of them are Southern. Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida all send 2 sets of returns, one for the Democrats, one for the Republicans, because the Republicans weren't about to lose control of the South.
So now, was the election fraud equal on both sides, or was one side?
It's pretty clear that it's more or less equal on both sides, but it's leaning more towards the Republicans. Republicans are trying to push very hard not to allow the Democrats to retake control of the South. What happens is that an electoral commission is created. In creating this electoral commission, you're going to have 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans, and 1 independent. It's pretty clear the independent is going to be the one deciding the case. And in all honesty, the Democrats have got a pretty strong case. The independent is elected to the Senate from his home state and is forced to resign from the commission. So the next best independent guy is brought in, but he's more Republican leaning. As a result, Louisiana, Florida, and South Carolina will all vote for Hayes. But there's still 1 vote in the balance, and that's in Oregon. Now, Oregon is interesting because part of being a member of the Electoral College, even today, is you are not allowed to hold a federal government position of any kind. If you do, you're disqualified. One of the electors in Oregon was a federal official.
How did he get in there?
Well, it was just by sheer dumb luck, and nobody paid attention. Democrats brought that up, but he was deemed worthy, and so Hayes gets the election. But the controversy doesn't end there, because keep in mind, this whole thing is going on all the way into 1870.
Well, it sounds like we're teetering on a civil war again.
In fact, there was concern of a second civil war. In fact, if ever you had a legitimate cause for a civil war, this would be it. It's a controversial election. It is very clear one party is definitely trying to tweak the election.
Well, it seems like both of them are trying
Well,
to
they're
tweak.
trying to tweak, but it's very blatant. The Republicans are pushing harder on this one than ever before. What happens is that Democrats and Republicans sit down, they have a meeting, and they discuss the issue. And the end result is very simple. Democrats will acknowledge the Hayes presidency if 2 things happen. 1, Reconstruction has to come to an end, and Union troops have to leave the South as a result. But the second, the Republicans will acknowledge the election of Wade Hampton as the governor of South Carolina. Because in South Carolina, that gubernatorial election was much like the presidential with election fraud. In fact, the Union Army barricaded the South Carolina State House to prevent Hampton from coming in to take office.
Wade Hampton being a former Confederate general.
Yes, he was. And so this was huge. Well, what happens is the Republicans agree to these terms, but election day, inauguration day was March 4th at the time. Here's the thing. March 4th fell on a Sunday that year in 1877. So inauguration day has to occur the next day. Rutherford Hayes and his wife are invited to the White House. They're having dinner with President Grant and his wife. Grant will excuse himself and Hayes from the ladies. They will go into another room, and standing in the next room is a judge. Hayes says, swear him in. Grant will say to Hayes, you're going to be sworn in right now. Rutherford B. Hayes will be sworn in as President of the United States at dinner the day before the inauguration, because the concern was, will Tilden's people stage an armed revolt and attempt to kill the president-elect? Well, nothing happened, but Grant was concerned about it. And so for one brief night, we had 2 presidents. But you know what? All the fun we have, sadly, There's a lot more elections to talk about, but just not enough time to do it in. Controversial presidential elections are part of our history. You might think about recent history and say, oh, this is controversial. It's nothing in comparison to what happened in the 19th century and in the earlier portions of the 20th century. To learn more about controversial elections, please visit our website at www.timetravel21.com or visit our website or email us at timetravel21@yahoo.com.